And welcome to episode 474 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we will be concluding our Javier Bardem series with 2018's Everybody Knows.
But everybody knows that.
Every time I hear the title in my head, I hear Neil Young. Like everybody knows this is nowhere.
I hear Leonard Cohen.
What boomer icon do you hear? Everybody knows voice in Andrew.
I'm gonna say Bruce Springsteen, but I have no reason why.
He's probably said the words everybody knows at one point in his life.
Non-0%.
And then in part one, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week. And let's go ahead and kick off, Andrew, with the movie of the moment. If you're a young person talking about movies, you're talking about this movie right here.
You most certainly are. That movie is Challengers, which stars Zendaya, along with Josh O'Connor, who I know from Emma, and then Mike Feist, who was really, really good in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story.
Yeah.
Those three characters are those three actors are basically the only people in this movie. I'm also looking at a long cast of other people, but this movie kind of belongs to those three people. I would say like 90% of the screen time is just dedicated to them and their relationship. They are all tennis players, like aspiring professional tennis players. They are also kind of all in a relationship with one another. It's not like a polyamorous movie, or at least not explicitly so, but it's definitely like a love triangle movie where all sides of the love triangle are kind of engaged at one point or another. But getting ahead of myself a little bit, this movie is by Luca Guadagnino, or Guadagnino, I think is maybe how you say it, who people know for Call Me By Your Name, the really tedious Suspiria remake, A Bigger Splash, I Am Love. We did I Am Love on the podcast a couple years ago.
That was such a boring movie.
Tilda Swinton. That is such a boring movie. And I think that Luca Guadagnino movies have the tendency to be boring movies. My friend Cam, who's also a patron of this podcast, says that he would describe Luca Guadagnino as European (derogatory). that's kind of the vibe of a lot of his movies.
I just want to state that like Cinematary is the most aggressively anti-Luca Guadagnino space that I am in. It's always really interesting to jump into Cinematary conversations about him because they're all so aggressive.
do people like the Suspiria remake? I've never
not specifically the Suspiria remake, but I think that people have a lot more like banked goodwill based on Call Me By Your Name and maybe Bones and All, and then maybe I think some people like A Bigger Splash.
I don't think enough people in the general public saw the Suspiria remake to have an opinion of it. I think that was.
I'm still team Suspiria remake, to be honest, but we'll see about Challengers. Andrew, tell us about Challengers. Sorry,
Challengers is great. Challengers is like maybe the most straightforwardly enjoyable Luca Guadagnino movie, because it's a romance, it's a sports movie, it's a comedy in a way, and it's just very energetic, and like the cinematography is always very engaging, and these actors are just so freaking charismatic as well. Like I said, they completely own this movie. They're all just like very personable, and they have these like really distinct personalities, and the actors do a great job communicating things about their characters and their relationships non-verbally. There's so much that's communicated in body language and posture, tone of voice, how close characters get to each other when they're talking at various points in the movie, kind of like reflecting the shifting dynamics of their relationships. Even what kinds of foods they eat. There are some very phallic foods that are like pointedly eaten in people's direction in this movie. And yeah, I guess like I already mentioned that it's a tennis movie and it's kind of like a love triangle, but I guess the plot is that Mike Feist and Josh O'Connor's character are both like they play doubles together, and Zendaya's character is a much more accomplished and like already renowned tennis player, though she's very similar to them in age. And both of these guys are like instantly obsessed with this woman, and they're both kind of like falling over themselves to try to connect with her in some way. And the thing that I guess has gone viral about this movie, and they're very much playing up in the trailer, is like their first big connection is kind of as a throuple in a way, or a threesome is maybe like the better way to say it, because they're not actually in a relationship. They just kind of like have a kind of fling. It doesn't really go where you might think it's going to go based on the trailer. But that being the impetus of this relationship definitely has huge ripple effects on the way in which like every different side of that relationship plays out for the rest of the movie. And this movie, I think, understands very well that a romance between three people is actually like four relationships. There's like person A and person B and person C and person A, and then there's also like the fourth relationship of all three of them as a unit. And depending on which two people, or if you're looking at all three people in one scene, like the dynamics are very different as the relationship develops. And also another thing that is important to note about this movie is that because these are athletes and they bond over their love of competition, there's definitely so much competition in the way in which they're kind of fighting over or fighting each other for the affection of other people in the relationship. And the movie kind of posits that the love of competition is very closely related to the love of domination. Zendaya's character is a very domineering character who kind of enjoys just being in control of the relationship at all times. She serves as Mike Feist's coach for a big chunk of this movie. And there's another part of the movie where Josh O'Connor is like begging her to be his coach. So like there's always a power dynamic at play here. Let's see what else to say. The tennis is very, very well filmed. So much of this movie is tennis. And Luca Guadagnino finds some really fun, cool ways to shoot tennis, including from the perspective of the ball at one point, which kind of feels stupid to watch, but is funny and like enjoyable in a way that his movies often are not. One thing that we were talking about off mic before we got into recording is that this movie has a score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who, you know, of course, people know from Nine Inch Nails, also their Social Network score, which is just one of the best film scores of the 21st century. And this score is no slouch. It is like very heavy, like techno, a lot of like really driving, like arpeggiated synths. And they will just like kick in sometimes in the middle of a conversation as, you know, the conversation is taken a turn and like the power dynamic has shifted just a little bit. And so like whether it's scoring a really intense tennis match or just two people kind of trying to jockey for position in some sort of conversation, this score is like very much pulsating and trying to get you like as locked in as possible in what's going on here. So very, very fun score. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross go crazy. I enjoy this movie a lot. It is maybe the most fun I've had at a Luca Guadagnino movie. I would probably say that Call Me by Your Name was my favorite, but I think that movie is elevated a lot by the Sufjan Stevens songs in it, and there's only 3 of them, and they're sparse. But this movie, I think that the cinematography is great. I think the music is great. I think the acting is great. I think the story is really interesting as well. Though I do think it is too long. This movie is over 2 hours long, and it takes you through so many twists and turns of this relationship that after a certain point, I was like, come on, I get it. Like, I don't think we necessarily need to add another layer of complication in the way these 3 people relate to each other. I will also say, to that point, someone needs to revoke Luca Guadagnino's title card privileges because he is constantly cutting back to like 12 years earlier, later that night, one day previously. And it just feels like I can't get a hold of like when I am at any given point, because these scenes will not last that long before I get whipped into another era. And to the movie's credit, I think that they do a good job at kind of showing you visually how old the characters are, even though they're always played by the same actors. Just things like their posture or their overall demeanor shifts as they go from young adulthood to adulthood, and like have experienced so much more of this professional sport that is kind of like grinding away at them. But overall, very positive feelings about Challengers. Fun movie, good time at the movies, and I'm glad that a director like Luca Guadagnino is being given a lot of money and big screens and these great actors to do a movie that is like not a franchise thing. It is just kind of an original movie about tennis. Who would have thought?
Tennis, time, like nonlinear time, too long. This is just Infinite Jest, isn't it?
I thought about bringing up Infinite Jest. I think that I don't necessarily know if I want to will a Luca Guadagnino Infinite Jest adaptation.
That would be so funny, to be honest. That would be the funniest.
He is a guy who has some pretty chaotic ideas for what to adapt. Like, he adapted Suspiria and made it.
He's got that Bob Dylan movie coming out someday, right?
He apparently is doing a film adaptation of Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, which doesn't make any sense to me. And I think he also made headlines at one point for wanting to make a version of Lord of the Flies with all women or all girls, I suppose. And, I could see Luca Guadagnino saying, I want to make Infinite Jest, but I think that he should probably not do that. I think that's a bad idea.
That would be so funny, though. Him in like full like Suspiria 2018 mode, like doing like a 5-hour Infinite Jest movie.
I would get down with it if it was durational cinema. It needs to be like 5 to 7 hours. I don't want somebody to try to cram Infinite Jest into 2 hours. Not even really a mini series. I don't think that would work.
No, it's got to be a movie.
It's got to be like fucking Out One.
I need to be in the theater for 12 hours or not at all.
Absolutely.
That's exactly it.
All right. Well, Challengers, it's still in theaters. I think I'm going to try to catch it this weekend.
You should.
But one movie I caught before it left theaters, which I think has been... It had a nice little run to it, but that is The People's Joker, which famously got kicked out of TIFF because Warner Brothers got mad because it used Warner Brothers DC got mad because they used a lot of versions of Warner Brothers and DC characters in it. but I'm glad it's seen the day of light because yeah, I think that like the way they use it's in a very interesting way. So for those
Wait. Can you explain that? I'm sorry. Like, is it like actual copyright infringement and they're taking action against the movie, or were they just like throwing their weight around at TIFF to just get it disadvantaged?
No, it like it got like had to go through a court system and it got
Oh
out
wow.
on you know the satire law pretty much like it's
Way to go, satire law.
yeah it's a good old Nathan Fielder, you know.
Yeah, dumb Joker.
Yeah. But yeah, so Vera Drew is the mind behind the People's Joker. Um, and for all intents and purposes, this is like a coming of age, a trans coming of age story about a comedian who wants to in this world that we're living in, comedy has been banned. Um, except for this like I don't even know how to like explain this movie. So comedy's been banned except for like this show that's pretty much like this state-run SNL that's also run by this hilariously 2D animated Lorne Michaels person. And that's the only comedy. And so she doesn't feel like she wants to be a part of that comedy. And so she creates this whole alt comedy space in Gotham City with the help of Penguin and a number of other Batman villains, and you know, in order to disrupt the status quo that's happening in Gotham City. Um, it's very like it's very much of the mind of like Tim and Eric, Adult Swim. That's the mind. That's the kind of the space you need to be in to kind of grapple with this movie. I do think though that there's some um, really strong commentary on like just kind of growing up and being trans. A lot of it, you know, a lot of the stuff that she kind of digs into in this movie, like I don't, you know, fully understand as somebody who you know, has not really I don't, you know, I don't have any friends who are trans or, you know, have not like talked extensively about their experiences with people who are trans. And so it was like on that note, a little bit, it was kind of eye opening. And I think that I hope that this is kind of a movie, and it seems to be from like the Letterboxd reviews that it's a movie that speaks to a lot of those people in terms of, you know, feeling like outsiders, feeling, you know, trying to find this sense of community. Um, and also just kind of the like how it kind of how it kind of creates this gap between, you know, if your parents are people who don't necessarily agree or see that as something, like just kind of the gap that it creates. And so you have like that whole story into it, but then you also have this just wild ass Batman parody thing going on. Um, and that's kind of the thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about because yeah, it was something that got shut down by Warner Brothers and DC because they're like, oh, like you're taking our characters and you know those are our characters. And you know, thinking broadly about like superhero movies at this point, like it's become very much like wash and repeat of, you know, insert. I mean, literally, we're about to get this movie in a couple weeks, the Deadpool movie, where it's just Deadpool and they insert Hugh Jackman's Wolverine into it, and that's pretty much the plot. Is that you get to watch those two. Let's bring out the toys again. These two toys play with each other.
I mean, we just had Godzilla X Kong.
Yeah, it's just like these two toys play with each other, and you're excited. Yeah. And like to me, what Vera Drew does with the People's Joker is like it one, it brings you back into more of an appreciation of like how counterculture and how you know it feels more of a time when like comic books weren't, you know, being pushed down your throat constantly by whatever the hit movie or TV show was. And it also like uses these characters less to feed like fans' insatiable need to like see, I want to see Batman with this character. I want to see Harley Quinn with this character, like stuff like that. And it's more just kind of utilizing these figures to better represent not only her experience, but also insecurities and intrusive thoughts and things like that. Like these are, like these are almost like super villain ids that are just kind of like forming around. Um, and also just kind of utilizes stuff that we're familiar with, different versions of the Joker. At times she's dressed up as like more of a Cesar Romero Joker. You have a character that's dressed up as like the Jared Leto Joker, things like that. And it's and to me that's kind of the fascinating part, as we get deeper into the superhero hole of like movie upon movie upon movie. Like to me, like this feels a bit akin to like something like a movie that we talked about ages ago in Shrek Retold, in that it's like taking this mass product and allowing people to kind of like utilize it for how they view these characters and how in kind of their own creativity. And so it's like, yeah, like it's not a carbon copy, it's not like Tom Hardy's Bane is showing up in this movie or Danny DeVito's Penguin is showing up in this movie. It's just kind of like this crude interpretation of that the actor's doing. That's kind of like, if you watch this, you'd be like, oh yeah, like the acting's not great, but that's not the point. Like it kind of has like this wonderful jovial community theater feel to it. And it's also incredibly funny. It's really, really funny. Like most of the time. I mean, like I said, you have a Lorne Michaels that is running this state-funded SNL cast thing. Like that's just wild.
How do all these pieces fit together? Like, what does the Joker have to do with the trans coming of age story, and what does that have to do with SNL?
Well, it's just, I think it's more a merging of her, like what she's interested in. It's like she wants to be an improv or stand-up comic. She like is fascinated with DC comics and the Batman characters. And so it's just kind of like utilizing these properties that and this is like, I kind of feel like the overall goal of the movie is it's utilizing these IPs, these intellectual properties that we know, to tell her coming of age, coming of self trans story, by using these characters, because that's just kind of, rather than just doing like a straight story. That's just kind of like, this is the story without anything added to it. It's just kind of like, yeah, like I'm going to tell you a coming of self story, but I'm going to do it with like Batman characters and alt comedy and things like that.
Is there I mean, with the title kind of makes me think about this, and obviously this ended up happening because of what you were talking about, it going through court and stuff. But is there like within the movie like kind of a like explicit, like we're taking these characters from the corporation and making them like for the people, like so that we can do stuff like this with characters? Because that's kind of like when I hear that title, The People's Joker, and when I heard that, like, oh, it pissed off Warner Brothers and they didn't want people to do these things with their characters without permission and all that. Like it feels kind of like a FU anti-capitalism sort of thing. Is it like intentionally that, or is that just kind of the metatextual thing?
Yeah, but I mean, it's taking these Batman villain and Batman characters, and it's not taking them directly from the movies, but it's various interpretations of them. It also includes real people playing them. It includes like different animations. It includes like kind of these like 3D early computer models of characters. Like it also is just kind of playing with a bunch of different realms of animation and live action and things like that. it very much is like this kind of smorgasbord experience that I feel like people are either gonna dig or just kind of be turned off by.
But I mean, is it like an intentionally like we're going to liberate these characters from private interests and make them basically like public, you know? Because like whenever a character goes into the public domain, it's like there's like a field day with like we're going to make a Winnie the Pooh horror movie and like whatever. Like that's when characters become like
Oh
the people,
no,
right? In
yeah,
that
no,
sense.
I don't think it's doing that. I think like I said before, it's just kind of like she likes DC Comics and like stand up comedy, and we're gonna
Gotcha.
smash those together into a movie, and this seems like it works.
Cool.
So it's not in theaters anymore, but I assume it'll probably get some sort of digital release. I recommend checking it out. I think it's at the like the way I saw it is at least it's like worth going and paying a ticket and giving Vera Drew money because this is a cool thing that she made, and we should get more stuff that pisses off Warner Brothers.
We should all do that.
But Michael, I'm gonna toss it over to you because this seems like a perfect transition.
Yeah, speaking of things that I don't know if it would piss off Warner Brothers, but it might. So I watched the movie Sperm World, which is a documentary about sperm donors, but specifically not like official sperm donors through like official channels. It's like through like a Facebook group. It's basically people making arrangements with each other to like donate sperm to like mothers that request it. So like there's in the Facebook group, there's like the men who are the donors, and people who want to become pregnant will come into the Facebook group and say like, is anyone donating? And they'll like basically like create an arrangement with each other that is not through the normal sperm donor channels, which tend to be kind of cost prohibitive, and like there's a lot of logistics that might not work for everybody. At least this is how the movie presents it. I'm not super up on the realities of above board sperm donation, but so this is a documentary about that. It's directed by this person named Lance Oppenheim, who also directed a few years ago a movie called Some Kind of Heaven, which is another documentary that I haven't seen, but that was kind of on my radar a few years ago when that came out. It's like about a retirement community. But this one is based on a New York Times piece, apparently. And the New York Times piece is "The Sperm Kings Have a Problem, too much demand." And I've not read that article, but what the movie is about is it follows around this series of donors who go through these channels and kind of follows like the various ways in which they approach this thing, which is very loosey goosey because there's no official channels, there's no rules or anything. It's just all just, arrangements made over like personal messages on Facebook and stuff. And so, like, for instance, there's this guy who is a sperm donor who like really likes to get to know the person he's donating sperm to, and they'll like chat for a long time. There's this other guy who actually has a Wikipedia page. His name is Ari Nagel, who's like a math professor, but he's like a serial sperm donor in the sense of like he is constantly like he almost like has this like white knight mentality about him where he's like, these people need my sperm. They keep requesting it, and he has over 100 kids fathered through this.
Does he know all 100 of those kids?
Well, this is what his thing is in the movie, is like his life is more or less falling apart as it's depicted in the movie, because he's constantly trying to go around and like be present for as many kids as he can and who want him to be present. So like there's this one part where it's like this little montage where he's talking about how hard it is to keep up with all their birthdays. And there's a scene of him using ChatGPT to create a birthday message for like one of the kids because he doesn't have time to write it himself. And like there's this other guy who he and his wife are trying to get pregnant at the same time that he's also donating to other people. And so there's like weird like domestic tension over that. And I don't know. It's just like kind of like a meditation on all these things. It sounds like a really wacky movie when I describe it, and it is in some regards because there's just the nature of the subject. But it's like strangely sweet and tender about like these things, because it becomes this kind of like rumination on like human loneliness and isolation. Like the guy who really likes to get to know his sperm donors, or not his sperm donors, his recipients, I guess. Like there's like an extended sequence in the movie, or not a sequence, but it's like an arc throughout the movie of him with one particular person he's donating to, and this person wants kids, but the doctors, like, she has health problems that like doctors are telling her is like making kids not a good idea, but she's going through with it anyway. And they start having like really intense conversations about like, if I die or if you die because you have this kid and I've been the donor, would you and your family be mad at me? And like they become like weird like friends through adversity, but the woman is not sure how close she wants to be with this guy. And so it's just like weird complicated emotions. There's another guy who gets slapped with the paternity suit, or not a paternity suit, sorry. One of the kids he fathers goes into custody of the state, like it gets taken by like, I guess, DCS or something like that. And so then he has to go to court because he's like one of the biological relatives of this child who's now in a ward of the state. And he's got to deal with that at the same time that he's dealing with all of his regular life. And like a lot of the movie plays almost like that these are like tragic characters who are donating. And tragic in like really kind of mundane and modern ways. Like we're all like alienated from like modern life and like the grind of like our like existence within like a society that demands certain things of us causes us to lose track of the things that we value and lose track of the people we care about. And like a lot of movies like that, the movie is very like the score is very like kind of dreamy, like almost like it's got kind of like a shoegazy, sometimes like explosions in the sky, post-rocky kind of vibe to it. A lot of the footage is like really shallow focus, which makes it really strange to look at as a documentary, because a lot of it kind of reads as like reenactment, and maybe some of it is, but it's a really striking aesthetic, and a really kind of interesting like take on these people who I think like would have been really easy to make just kind of like a wacky, like, look at these weirdos. And it's not really that, although like I guess you could have that attitude toward the movie if you wanted to, because there's plenty of stuff that is kind of strange in the movie. But I feel like it's going for something that's more compassionate than that, or at least more curious than that. Like it's not overtly dismissive of these characters, like what they're doing. It's more like exploring what they're doing and exploring kind of like the emotional ramifications of that. And I don't know, I think it's worth watching if any of that sounds interesting to you. I watched it on Hulu. It was also, another thing is, it was made for FX, like the cable channel. So it has kind of a weird structure in the sense of like there's like spaces where you can tell there were supposed to be commercial breaks. So it's like very much like a TV production, but because of all these kind of interesting thematic ambitions and some of the like cinematic choices, it doesn't have that like kind of like Dateline, like, TV documentary feel to it. It does feel something more cinematic than simply like, oh, this is a cable special on some wacky people. Anyway,
does Hulu fill in those commercial breaks for you, or did you were you able to watch it with like a Hulu that doesn't have
my Hulu has ads, but weirdly enough, they don't have ads at all the ad breaks. If you've ever watched a movie on Hulu, they do like 3 or 4 ads at like varying intervals through like the first half of the movie, and then the rest of the movie has no ad breaks. So you can tell there are places where it would have been like an ad break on FX that Hulu does not give me one. Anyway,
did you get like I know Hulu has a lot of like ED ads. Did you get like some of those ads?
No, disappointingly, I did not. It would have been good though. It's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, honestly, perfect audience.
Yeah.
Also, this is one of those instances where you probably should have watched us talk about this. If you were listening to the audio version, should have listened to us and watched this on YouTube. Because we just talked for 10 minutes and had Sperm World with our pictures, on it on the screen.
It's good. just dudes being dudes,
Yeah, right. just dude time. All right, Andrew, we got like 5-6 minutes. You want to talk about the war?
I guess so. I guess we can talk about Civil War, reenact the Civil War discourse. I just wanted to say that I saw Civil War, the new Alex Garland movie, and I wanted to kind of bring back up something that Michael mentioned when he was talking about Civil War a couple of weeks ago, which is the idea that Alex Garland doesn't have anything that he wants to say about American politics in 2024. The thing that happens at the beginning of the movie, the thing that's revealed at the beginning of the movie that's meant to throw you off, being that the Civil War is between like the federal government and the Western forces, I believe it's called, an alliance between Texas and California that doesn't really map onto the way in which the American political system works right now. It is true that Alex Garland is being very coy about what exactly the political undercurrents at work in this Civil War are. But I don't necessarily know if I agree that Alex Garland isn't trying to like share his own perspective on American politics. And I think that is both like a good thing and a bad thing. I'm glad that at least in my reading, the movie is not trying to be quote unquote apolitical, as if that is a thing that one can be in any situation, let alone when making a movie titled Civil War. But I also think that, his political perspective is kind of a limited one. But anyways, like my basic take here is that there is like you can see the causes of the Civil War, or you can kind of see like the way in which the political alignment of it has shaken out. This is a war against fascism. The president has taken a third term. The president has had journalists shot on sight. There was something called the Antifa massacre, which, if you know anything about Antifa, you know that they're not the ones doing the massacring in that situation. There are other details too that I'm struggling to think of right now, but maybe
he's disbanded the FBI.
He disbanded the FBI. Yeah, like these are all things that like pretty easily map onto the MAGA movement.
Andrew, I'm going to push back against you, not because I think that Alex Garland, the person, is not. I think he's like basically like a liberal centrist. Like that seems to be in real life what Alex Garland's perspective is.
He labels himself as a centrist.
Yeah, but I think what people have meant when the people who are in good faith engaging with the movie, which this has been another one of those movies where people just got so pissed about it online that I felt a little bewildered. But the people who are in good faith engaging with the movie, who are saying it's apolitical, I think what they mean is that if you are like, depending on who you are, those things that you just named are a Rorschach test for what you think the movie's political alliances are. So for instance, third term, like literally, like conservatives have fears about like the executive branch, like, taking over as well when it's not Trump, right? Like
but a Democrat has never threatened to do that.
I mean, a Democrat had like literally the only third term president is FDR, who is a Democrat. But like what I'm saying is, there, like when Obama was president, I remember these conspiracy theories about Obama was going to like abolish term limits. Or if you look at like what they say about communist countries, like, oh, such and such is a dictator now because he abolished term limits so that he could enact his socialist regime or whatever.
Sure, but Trump like actually was posting Twitter memes about like
no, you don't understand. I don't mean connected to the reality of, I mean, like in terms of how audiences perceive these things. I think that people are saying he has structured the movie such that anyone entering into the movie is going to feel like the movie is on their side politically, because the fears are vague enough that they can broadly map onto the fears of like MAGA conservatives or like liberals.
And I think
I don't mean that that's what he intends, but I think that's what people mean when they say that. I don't actually think that that's true, but I think that a lot of those fears are things that right-wingers think that like a out of control Democrat is going to try.
And I think that there's a certain degree to which that's intentional. Like Alex Garland definitely does not want his film to be like screaming, "I am liberal propaganda," in the trailers, right? He wants a wide audience to go see it, especially like maybe an audience that tends to go see war movies, which definitely skews rightward. And like right-wing media has been really kind of like amping people up about the idea of a civil war for a couple of years now. So like I think that the interest in the idea of a civil war is like on that side of the aisle. So I think he knows that he's going to have a lot of right wingers in his audience, and he, as a self-proclaimed centrist, I think that he like very much wants to kind of welcome them into a conversation, and I think that he wants them to see what the actual on the ground reality of a civil war would be for people having to bear the brunt of that. Not people fighting it, but people kind of like caught in the crosshairs in one way or another, primarily journalists, but he's also stopping and showing you how it's affecting towns and little refugee camps and things like that. And I think that there is that is kind of a canny move to like make a movie that is, I think, anti-fascist, but make that movie in a way that like a fascist could walk into it and maybe have their minds changed a little bit. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. that's not how these people's minds tend to work. But I do think that like Alex Garland does like believe in the idea of there being good guys and bad guys in this situation. And I think he is more aligned with the anti-fascist fighters than the fascist regime that they're fighting against. Though in interviews, when he talks about his own centrism, his main thing is that he's concerned about extremism. He thinks that like there's too much extremism on both sides of the aisle today, and maybe the reason why that doesn't come across as, it doesn't come across as like really smug in the movie is that like it doesn't really address the idea of left-wing extremism at all. Like it's not.
I also disagree, because I think I've seen a number of people mention that Antifa massacre is an ambiguous phrase. It could be who perpetuated the massacre or who was the victim of the massacre.
This is one of those things that I think it is a Rorschach test. Yeah. If you believe that Antifa is like a terrorist organization,
right?
Yeah, you're going to believe that. But
yeah, if you think that Antifa is like a federation of like terrorists, which a lot of people do, though. I mean, like that's the thing, is that the movie doesn't actually challenge that, especially if you think that it's an anti-fascist movie, because it proves, quote unquote, that there are lots of people out there with guns ready to take down a president.
True.
Or take down people who are trying to take down a president, depending on which side you think people are on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that despite the fact that right-wingers think Antifa is like a terror cell, at the end of the day, it's just not. Like they can think that all they want, but that's not the reality. And I think this movie is interested in like, what is the reality? I think that, it's a movie that is focusing on journalists that are trying to do as objective of reporting as possible. And therefore, I think the movie wants us to like look at the objective facts of what the political situation in the U.S. is right now.
But there's extremism on both sides, Andrew. But I do think like that's the damnedest thing about this movie is I watched it and thought, wow, that's kind of interesting and all the stuff I said last time. And I agree with a lot of the things you're saying now. But then Alex Garland opens his mouth and makes the movie sound dumb. Like when he says there are extremists on both sides, like in a way you can read that to think, oh, he does think that that Antifa is a violent force in America. And maybe he put that in that seed into his movie. Like,
listen, we also have to remember that he's British. So
yeah, when's the last time a British person has had a good opinion?
I mean, they're British. I mean, come on. Like, when have the Brits ever got anything right?
I think he's also just probably spent too much time on Twitter. I think that, you know, most people complaining about extremism are probably just like they got yelled at online once. And that, because like what actual like structural organizational power does left-wing extremism have in America?
Well, Andrew, you don't understand that Joe Biden is just waiting for January of 2025 to take off his hat and reveal like his beret and to start executing the billionaires.
Dark Brandon rises.
Dark Brandon's coming.
4 more years. Pause. All right. Nobody got my Joe Biden reference.
I was assuming it was a Joe Biden reference, but I thought there was more to it besides the please clap.
All right, we're gonna wrap up this extreme part 1 and get into part 2 where there's also some tensions getting high out in little old Spain. So stick with us for that. And we're back with part 2 of episode 474 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be concluding our Javier Bardem series with 2018's Everybody Knows, written and directed by Asghar Farhadi. The film stars Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem, Ricardo Darin, and Carla Compra. Laura and her 2 children travel from Argentina to Spain to attend her sister's wedding. The joyful reunion soon turns tragic when her older daughter gets kidnapped, revealing a dark web of hidden secrets. Asghar Farhadi on why
really just one.
Yeah, it's one big secret.
Yeah,
you know,
it's not that secret though.
No dark web. just the one little.
I've seen unfriended dark web. I know what a dark web looks like.
Farhadi on why he selected Penelope Cruz and Javier Bardem for the lead roles. Quote, that goes back to The Past, his movie The Past, not just like which I directed in France. One of the candidates for the main role was Penelope, but she was already taken by another project. She was giving birth to her child. We weren't able to work together, but it was the beginning of our friendship. I spoke to her about this story and later to Javier when we met in Los Angeles. For the last 4 years, we've kept in touch and they've been following the project. But after The Past, I ended up deciding to go back to Iran and to direct another film, which meant this project being put back 2 years. But we didn't lose sight of each other. Above and beyond their performances, these 2 actors have contributed a lot to the production of the film. Throughout the project, they have been generous in responding to my questions about other actors or other subjects. Bardem on his character Paco. I really like the character. As the great Victoria Abril said, as actors, we have to defend our characters rather than judge them. Otherwise, we're not doing our job. That said, sometimes there will be characters who make you uncomfortable, but that's not the case here. It's like Ramon Sampedro in The Sea Inside or Ronaldo Arenas in Before Night Falls. Characters I remember fondly. Paco is like that. There's a light about him, a glow, a simplicity which is akin to a certain type of wisdom. He's a down-to-earth soul, full of common sense.
Dude, these Javier Bardem quotes that you read in your intros are just killing me.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to miss the guy. He's got some good quotes. Bardem on his preparation for the role. I was simply present and allowed myself to be guided by one of the smartest, funniest, inspiring, and caring people I've ever met. We were shooting for almost 4 months, and for me it was like I don't know. What's the word in English? Like a game. Farhadi is so grounded and at the same time so high in his thoughts. He always feels like he's in contact with something higher than him. It's like he's this vehicle of transmission for something very creative when he tells you where to go and how to get there. Bardem on working with his wife Penelope Cruz. Life has changed. We have grown. We've grown up. Everything is different once you're family. That is the priority as it should be. We're no exception from that. We work as hard as we can, but we recognize how hard we can work depends on each other's needs. It's important not to be confused by fiction. Fiction is fiction. Reality is its own thing. When you're younger, because we worked together many times over the years, we met when I was 21 and she was 16. You tend to confuse one for the other or mix them. Now I'm going to be 50 in a few weeks, and I don't do this anymore. She's the same way. You must always know when you're working on the level of recreation outside of real life. Penelope and I, we have to protect us. And in 2019, the New York Times said, "What makes Everybody Knows so intensely watchable is the urge to see what shape these specters will take when they finally appear." Farhadi is an excellent screenwriter and an impressive handler of actors, but the film nonetheless adds up to less than the sum of its parts. And the LA Times said in 2019 that at times it feels as if Everybody Knows might have been more fully realized as an actual TV series, one that explored its characters at more patient length and allowed all this backstory to take deeper root. It might have also allowed Farhadi to achieve the kind of minute understanding minute understanding of cultural nuance he did in A Separation and his other Iranian set triumphs. On that note, Everybody Knows.
Everybody knows.
Had anybody seen this when it came out?
I saw it not when it came out, but whenever it was available on home media.
Yeah.
You've seen quite a few Farhadi movies.
Yeah, I'm generally a fan.
You're a big Farhadi.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Which the kind of negative tenor of a lot of the reviews of this movie are kind of weird to me. Maybe you guys disagree, but I think this movie is good. It's not. I think implicit in all of these is it's not a separation, which it is not.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I thought.
And I wanted to ask you about that as somebody who's seen quite a few of them, because I want to just compare it to A Separation, but I'm wondering, like, how does this compare to his other movies?
I mean, all of his, well, not all, but a lot of his movies are structured like A Separation, where there's this like really meaty, like almost like Chekhovian like narrative hook that like the rest of the movie is just like intricately structured around.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie in particular feels shaggier than those movies, although it still has that same thing. In fact, like the movie about Ellie is kind of about like has a lot of the same beats as this movie because it's also about a woman who like disappears in the middle of like otherwise like festive times.
Yeah, I saw a couple of Letterboxd reviews refer to this as like an inverse of that movie.
Yeah, because in About Ellie, it's like this woman who no one really knows that well gets invited along on this like beach trip, and then she disappears in the middle of the beach trip, and they're all kind of like, we should look for her, but we don't know anything about her really. She's just like this one person that we know from this one place. And so like here it's the opposite, which is like it's a intimately connected family member who disappears. And I think that like, but a lot of his movies have that kind of central narrative hook where there's a kind of intrigue or mystery surrounding it. And I don't know, sometimes it feels tighter and everything feels a little bit more connected than others. I think A Separation is clearly like the pinnacle of what he's done, and it's like justly his most famous movie. But I think they all, like most of his movies, do kind of work like that. And this is like no real difference in that regard. I do kind of wonder about when people say the cultural specificity, and I don't know, like I'm not Iranian, and so I don't know how specific he is about Iran and life in Iran. Like he has the things that I expect to see about Iran, like the Muslim state and the like, head coverings and like the kind of things that we all know about America. And like he has interesting things to say about like family units in Iran. But I don't know, like I don't know enough about Iran to know how specific culturally that is. I mean, a lot of the things that happen in a separation could just as easily happen in the United States, but you tinge it with Christianity instead of Islam, in terms of like the prejudices or like the kind of like the cultural expectations for women or things like that. And maybe not to the specific degree that it is in like a separation, but I don't know. I guess to the same by the same turn, I don't know enough about Spain to know that this isn't culturally specific either.
There's some stuff going on with the cultural moment that Spain is in 2018 in this movie. The person I watched this with has lived in Spain around the same time actually that this came out, and said that Spain was going through a really extreme economic crisis at the time. And so near the beginning of the movie, when there's a couple of guys sitting in a diner talking about not being able to get a job. Meanwhile, there's all these migrants from Northern Africa who are working a lot of the jobs that they used to have. And there's kind of like xenophobia and scapegoating coming on. Like that's very much emergent from the political moment. But, that element ends up feeling like kind of not a red herring, but sort of a side thing in this movie. This movie is not really about that. It's not really about economic insecurity or xenophobia. And if it is, it seems to me maybe like affirming those prejudicial thoughts that some characters have. Like when somebody goes missing, one question to ask is like, well, it must have been one of those migrant workers who did it. And then Javier Bardem goes and like searches through all their bags and stuff. And I believe that we don't really get all that much information about the people who actually did do the kidnapping, but I think we're supposed to think that one of them is like a North African, but it's all very vague.
That, but yeah, it is vague. But isn't it the person who actually did the kidnapping is family to them, though, right?
Kind of. I mean, like it's her boyfriend, the father of her child, is the one who like is putting it on, but she's just
the conduit, right?
She's just the person in the in the house, kind of helping facilitate it.
Yeah. And this is also something that I struggled with in this movie. There are a lot of characters in like this really sprawling family tree, but none of them really get quite enough time or characterization for you to kind of see how all those pieces fit together. And so like even at the end of the movie, I feel like I barely knew this girl who like helped the kidnapping happen.
Yeah, she's got a scene at the beginning, and then in the middle of the movie, she's just kind of looking concerned most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I going back to the point you were making before, I thought the kind of economic hardship, like that kind of economic class disparity, would have been much more like influence into it. Because you think about, you have that scene where the father, the patriarch of the family, is in this bar, like yelling at people to give him his land back and give him money. And not only is he just kind of like, yelling kind of in the wind, it seems like, but also like the people, like the townspeople are kind of just like all right, like crazy old man, but also just like they don't want to give him money. Like you see, it's not necessarily said explicitly, but you see like the wedding and like the house that they live in is pretty extravagant.
Oh, they got money.
Yeah. And like you look at even Javier. I mean, Javier Bardem has like, a house, but it's not next, nearly the extravagance of that. And they make it pretty explicit that they feel like they kind of helped him out to kind of get that place.
Well, we learn that he was initially a servant or something in that family's house, and was kind of like elevated to the status of a family member, I guess, through his relationship with Penelope Cruz, which, you know, there's obviously a lot of resentment towards him from other members of the family. So I don't know, maybe it is
I was about to say, I think
more like centrally about that economic class divide than I'm saying that it is.
Yeah, because I think all that's really interesting, because like I think one of the interesting things in the movie is the way that the people who are suspected, once you get past the initial like, well, it must be, you know, these other people, is like the movie becomes a lot of suspicion amongst the people. Like Javier Bardem's wife assumes that the family has orchestrated this as retaliation against him because of his like class mobility that a lot of the other people in the family resent. Like the father has lost, like they have money, but there's kind of a Pride and Prejudice element to it, where it's like this family that has money is seeming to be teetering on the precipice of having their estate kind of start to fall apart. And so there's like that element where they're trying to, like, they're really desperate to hold on to like what they have because of maybe the precarity of the economy around them. So they have to hold on to like property, which Javier Bardem ends up giving up in the end. And I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's not, I think there's a lot of like character beats specifically that are not well fleshed out, but like actually I thought watching it this time, the economic stuff was the interesting stuff for me.
I'll be honest, like the kind of you know, we get into spoiler territory, like the second twist of, oh, this is actually your daughter that you and I had, was kind of boring to me, because I felt like it would have been a lot more interesting if if he had to make the decision to give them the money based off of, you know, based off of like, are you just in love with Penelope Cruz and you're going to give her the money, or are you not going to do it? I felt like it kind of gave him a little bit of an out by going, oh, by the way, this is your kid that we didn't tell you about. But
also kind of predictable. I called it when the girl and Javier Bardem's nephew, which I guess is like her cousin, are up in the clock tower during the wedding, and they see some like scrawled initials on the wall of the clock tower, and they're talking about how everybody knows that, you know, my uncle and your mom used to be a thing. And like, it's at that point in the movie, which is maybe 15-20 minutes in, I was like, I bet she's actually Javier Bardem's daughter. So when that reveal happened, I was like, yeah, everybody knows that. I knew that.
Well, it is such an obvious like thing within the dramatic pieces that have been set up. Like I do wonder like how much of a reveal it's intended to be. Like I wonder, like, I don't know, like you're led to suspect it so heavily that when the character finally says it out loud, it's less of a like rug pull and more of a like confirmation of things that you knew. And I don't know, like I don't think that it would be more meaningful, I think, if we knew more about their past, like Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz's past, which we don't know a ton, except that they were involved with each other. But I don't think that it's, at least like viewing it the two times that I've seen it, it doesn't feel like a failure of the movie that it's predictable. It feels like a function of the drama, that like this is kind of the inevitable other shoe that dropped, that you were like waiting for it to happen.
Yeah. Though I agree that I wish we got more of their past, but I also wish we got more of their present. We don't really see Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz interact all that much before the kidnapping takes place. And once it does, Penelope Cruz kind of stops being a character. She's just kind of crying in every scene that she has. She's inconsolable. And Javier Bardem, I mean, I don't really feel like there's all that much to his character either. I mean, he said in that quote that you read earlier, Zach, there's kind of like a warmth to him and a wisdom to him. There's not really that much of a character. There's not like specificity. Like I just enjoy watching this character because it's Javier Bardem.
Yeah.
Not because he's any more fleshed out than any of the other characters in this movie.
He's a down-to-earth soul full of common sense.
Yeah. And it got me thinking about like Javier Bardem's star power, you know, as we are kind of exploring in the series. And you know, last week you guys talked about The Counselor, or I guess 2 weeks ago you guys talked about The Counselor, which I think is a little bit more in keeping with kind of the stuff that he tends to be known for in the United States, where he's kind of this very singular, strange villain. And I think that he can play different flavors of that very, very well. He is just magnetic on screen when he's playing some sort of weirdo. And I think that Javier Bardem can very convincingly play, you know, a regular guy that you could see yourself being or wanting to be with. But it's not as interesting as the weirdo villain.
It's kind of like I think a good comparison is Ray Fiennes, because like he's known as like the commandant in Schindler's List, or Voldemort in Harry Potter, or you know, Gustav H in Grand, which are very like the first two are like these just very like kind of iconic domineering movie villains, you know. And then Gustav H is just this very like eclectic singular character. Like when do you get a movie where it's just like normal guy Ray Fiennes? I guess like when he's M in the Bond movies, he's like relatively normal, but like you don't get normal guy Ray Fiennes movies.
I do think that like I don't know, I do enjoy it, not to like just Bardem, but I do enjoy like the warmth that he brings, because I agree that a lot of what is compelling about his screen presence is that he's Javier Bardem and you're watching him, but like that's movie star power, right? I like watching him, and he's like interesting to watch as like even just like a kind of regular guy who's going through a fairly like standard dramatic arc. I think that like the textures of what he brings to that role are like really, really watchable and make me feel more for the character than I might otherwise, which is the point of having actors who are kind of like known quantities and like recognizable, is that their body of work and like what you know about like their face and like their mannerisms is part of what informs like even mundane performances or mundane roles, I should say. And I don't know, I think that what's here for his character is not particularly like profound, but it's like dramatically sound. And what is like on top of that layered is like what Javier Bardem is bringing to like the individual like choices to act out that role. And you know, I don't know, I enjoyed watching it.
No, that's a very good point. I like the word texture to describe what he brings to the performance, because like just through his mannerisms, through his like facial expression, he's definitely like able to convey the sense of a guy who's like lived a life. Even if we're not really getting a whole lot of that past, you can kind of fill in the gaps a little bit for yourself just based on the gravitas he brings to it.
Another comparison I thought of is like Willem Dafoe.
Yeah. When is the last normal Willem Dafoe line?
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Florida
like
Project,
people,
maybe.
Yeah, people like lost their minds at him in the Florida Project, and it's like he's not doing anything like exceptional, but like he's a normal dude compared to what you think of him in like The Lighthouse or Poor Things or Antichrist, or like
he's about to be in Nosferatu.
Yeah, like he's always or even like his stuff in like Wes Anderson movies. He's always a weird little dude, but like in Florida Project, he's just a normal guy. And people, I think that's kind of like it's a similar thing where, you know, when Willem Dafoe enters a movie, like you're just like, I know what that guy's about.
Yeah, I think maybe the best example of this is Willem Dafoe in The Northman. When you get to that scene in The Northman, you're like, hell yeah, this is about to go crazy, and it does.
I think that's why like directors cast him, is they're like, let's just get insane for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And they're
Don't
like,
you ever
yo,
want to go ape shit?
let's do it. One of the things I saw brought up a lot in like the interviews with Asghar Farhadi was a director who a lot of his movies based, we talked about it a little bit, but based in Iran. This one based in Spain. It was kind of interesting. He was kind of just like, yeah, I don't I don't see much difference. But Javier Bardem had a good quote talking about how he just felt like he was a director who like was able to kind of capture spirit, capture the story, like craft these characters. And so it didn't, I guess it could have been something that was written in Farsi and filmed in Iran, but it works just as well in Spain because of the way that he's able to kind of craft these characters and direct the movie.
Yeah, there are some people who do not like, because the two movies that he has that are outside of Iran are The Past and Everybody Knows. I don't actually know if A Hero was in Iran or not.
I think it is.
But some people look at those as like lesser works by him, and I haven't seen The Past in a long time, but I remember really liking The Past like quite a bit. And I this is not one of my favorites of his, but I think it's still strong. And I don't know. I just got done saying like I like the baggage you bring when an actor that is in a role, but I do wonder like how people would have responded to this movie if Farhadi's name wasn't on it and it was just like a random Spanish name. Like if you weren't bringing the baggage of this is a guy that we're used to depicting the Muslim world, this is a guy that we're used to depicting Iran and kind of a patriarchal like familial system, like those are like a lot of what his Iranian movies are kind of focused on. If you didn't bring that baggage into expecting this of this movie, like, and you simply looked at it as like a melodrama or something like that, I wonder how people would have thought about it. Because I do get the feeling that a lot of the negative reviews are kind of or middling reviews are kind of tinged with like we wish he would we wish he would have stuck with Iran and doing what he knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like I'm just curious about that. Like all of his movies have a real like playwright sensibility to them, and I think like one of the interesting things about plays compared to like a lot of other media is the extent to which they're translated and performed in all different contexts, like culturally. Like there's like the like in it's not Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy. In Drive My Car, there's a whole extended like we're performing Chekhov thing within, in
Japanese,
obviously like not a a Russian context. And I don't know. If you think about Farhadi that way as like more of a writer than a director, like it is kind of interesting, like him like transposing like different like similar dramatic beats into different like cultural contexts. I don't know.
That does seem like what he's most interested in, like creating these dramatic scenarios and watching characters bounce off of each other in a state of tension or skepticism. Nobody knows who to trust. Like that. That seems to be what he's most interested in.
Yeah, that's like almost all of his movies that I've seen, and I think that he can be really good at doing that in a way that feels really, really deep and like extraordinarily nuanced, like in A Separation. Or I think About Ellie is really good that way. Where I think sometimes it just works on a purely like it's the dramatic engine, and I think that that's like kind of what Everybody Knows is most about. Even though like I do think that some of the economic anxiety in this movie is interesting, but not knowing much about Spain is interesting in a kind of archetypal way to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think everything in it works. It works, and it's engaging just because it's an engaging script, and you have a lot of good actors in it, not just Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz, but a lot of the actor who plays Penelope Cruz's husband in this is like a pretty famous Argentinian actor who's been in a number of things. The Spanish guy who played like I couldn't really tell what his relation, but like Fernando, who like they were dealing with, who kind of had like was the middleman between them and the cop.
Yeah.
He was the brother in nobody on this was in the Beautiful episode, but was in that episode. And so I was like, oh, it's this guy again. Who's kind of being squirmy, again, talking about textured. This is what I expect from this actor. And so I think it was just overall like I was entertained. It was a little long.
It was a little long,
but I thought it was
like
a
2 hours and 20 or something like that. That's too long.
It was a solid little thriller.
Though, thinking about Farhadi as like a kind of a theatrical director, somebody who was mostly interested in like the scenario, I couldn't help but compare this to a movie that I recently rewatched, which is Akira Kurosawa's High and Low. Also a movie about kidnapping, also a movie about class disparity. But Kurosawa, for as interested as he is in people, he is primarily interested in images and like cinema as like this moving art form.
That dude's awesome.
And he's great. And I feel like in that movie, it kind of like splits the kidnapping story into two halves, where there's like the tension of the unknown when we don't know who this guy is or where he went with this child. And then there's like the chase once we have some clues. And I think that both of those halves are way more thrilling than anything that we get in this movie, primarily because of the way that Akira Kurosawa constructs images. Like the first 40 minutes of that movie is confined to one apartment interior, but he's able to create such this like palpable, like suffocating sense of tension in that apartment that I don't really get anywhere here. And I wish that there was more of an investigation, more of a chase. It almost feels like it's an anticlimax when the kidnapped girl just like returns or
although with like a 30-second like heart attack when you think she's been dropped in the water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I like it. He's also just like bloop, and he's like, what? They throw her? And he kind of has like a delayed like, oh shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Any other final thoughts on Everybody Knows before we wrap up?
I missed the I didn't watch Beautiful or The Sea Inside, which I guess
you dodged a bullet on The Sea Inside.
Yeah, I heard I was considering watching them, and then I listened to y'all's podcast, and y'all convinced me not to.
This is the only one I liked out of the entire series. So
really, wow. I was about to ask though, like you talked about like Javier Bardem in The Counselor, or like you could think about him in like No Country for Old Men, or is it Skyfall? Is that the Bond movie he's in? Like where he's all playing these kind of flamboyant characters to a certain degree.
Also, Pirates of the Caribbean.
He's really bad in that movie.
Man, I totally forgot he was.
He's really bad in that movie.
But anyway,
but in his defense, everybody's bad in that movie. What a memory hole. But I guess my question was like we talked about him playing kind of a more like down to earth fellow in this movie. Like, is it like what he does in those other movies, like Beautiful and Sea Inside, or is this kind of like a new beat for him with this movie compared to the others that we've watched?
Sea Inside, he's more doing a thing because he's playing someone who's like confined to a bed. For the entirety of the movie.
He's capital A acting in that one.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. He's going for those trophies.
And he's an asshole.
Javier Bardem doesn't seem to think so, though. Like in that quote, he seems to think he's so full of wisdom and warmth and stuff.
Yeah, it's actors. He's not bad and Beautiful. It's just the movie is so like just kind of fizzles. Like he's not bad though. He's good in that. It's a whole different character though, because Paco seems to like have has like a steady life and then kind of tanks it a little bit. This guy is in like the bottom gutter of his life and it's just like, how can I circle the drain and go down it?
Yeah, I think that this not to get too meta here, but when we make these actor series, we usually try to pick ones that are a little bit off the beaten path, and also ones that like we have not necessarily seen and want to see.
I just wanted to see. I wanted us to talk about more Spanish movies. Is my goal in this one.
Very true. Yeah, and unfortunate that the Spanish language movies were not better in the series.
This is technically a Spanish language movie.
Yeah, I didn't really like this movie that much. Sorry. I like Javier Bardem in Terrence Malick's To the Wonder a lot.
Man, I forgot he was in that. Yeah,
that. He has a real good role. He plays a priest who's kind of like having a crisis of faith. But I don't know. What do you guys think is Javier Bardem's best role? It's hard to imagine any of them ranking higher than No Country for Old Men for me.
I guess the thing about, I mean, he's extremely good in No Country for Old Men, but I think that like I get wrapped up in, I don't know, like I guess that is the correct answer, and that's the answer that I in my heart believe in. But like he's part of like a canon of acting roles that canon vaguely annoys me, not because of the individual roles, but because of the way they're talked about, like in the same way that like Heath Ledger's Joker, or like these kind of like iconic like nihilist villains. Like there's like a canon of like, and the actors who like, gave it their all in that role. Like I'm like vaguely annoyed that that's his most iconic role, because in a lot of other roles, Javier Bardem is much less withdrawn and more like, I don't know, like I guess I like him being more having like a recognizable human psychology, whereas like he's a force of nature more or less in No Country for Old Men. And I don't know. I'm
think
being
you
contrarian.
Don't think about him as like an edgelord villain. Think about him as a Cormac McCarthy character.
No, I'm being contrarian like because I like
pure evil.
I like No Country for Old Men a ton. I like his role in that movie a ton. So I'm being like contrarian, but like I guess it's the difference between my favorite and the best.
What's your favorite?
I don't know. I'd have to think about it. He's really good in Dune 2. I don't want to.
He is.
I don't know that I think that Dune 2 is.
Well, when he's just
favorite,
like, oh,
he's extremely good.
I feel like that's a good balance of like a little over the top and otherworldly, as everything is in Dune, but also like that is a real guy. I understand the psychology of that character.
Yeah. I also liked him in The Counselor, so I don't know.
He was fun in The Counselor. He's fun in The Counselor. I mean, he scores.
Got his Sonic the Hedgehog haircut.
He scores 100,000 points just for telling Brad Pitt the story of Cameron Diaz not Brad Pitt, telling Michael Fassbender the story of Cameron Diaz fucking his car, and then being like, I don't know why I told you that. Just forget I ever said that. And then
dude, he sells the hell out of that scene though. That scene is so ludicrous, so good. But like he's in it, man.
He describes it as being like a fish.
Like a catfish.
Like a catfish.
And then he's just like, I don't know why I told you that. Just forget I ever said that. He just like walks out of the room. You're just like, and then it just goes away, and you're like, how is the scene adding anything to the movie? It's not. It's just we got to live it for about 5 minutes. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we list all the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support the show, give us some money, you can go to patreon.com/Cinematary. It can be $1, $5, $50,000. It can be $300,000. We've kidnapped your daughter.
Yeah, if you have a vineyard in Spain that you've been looking to sell your shares off of, and just
and you're also your lost love is
I have 2 children, and I guess I've never paternity tested them, and Javier Bardem could be the father.
That's true.
It's a non-zero chance. He was alive at the same time.
That's true. So if that happens, give
Your
us some money
vineyard.
on
I
Patreon.
need the money from it.
But in our next episode, we're going to be kicking off easily the fan favorite series, and that is Young Critics Watch Old Movies. And it's good because we're getting past the young critics stage. Like we don't feel young, at least anymore, but we are in the context of things. And so we're finalizing our full young critics list, but we do have our first one, which is going to be our 1920s pick. And this is a special one because for at least this is the 10th year, 8 of the 10 years that we did it, we had a poll, and we would poll people to see what we should talk about. And I think that this movie, 1921's The Phantom Carriage, was on the poll just about every year.
Every year, yeah.
And as Michael said earlier, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Like Phantom Carriage never won. And so
It also got beat by some frankly hilariously more obscure movies.
It did. It would just get
Heaven.
bombed. Yeah, it would just get bombed. And you know what? So screw it. Next episode, we're kicking off Young Critics with 1921's The Phantom Carriage. We're finally gonna watch it.
Fuck it, Phantom Carriage.
Let's go. So yeah, we'll check out. Look for Twitter or whatever. I don't know. Just look in the air. Maybe we'll have a plane flying through your city. I don't know. We'll tell you what the Young Critics lineup is. Until then, thank you for listening, and we will see you next episode.
Bye.